Hello, and welcome to a Skyrim thing. I've spoken before at some length about the location design of Morrowind's Seyda and Balmora, but I am now turning my analytical eye to Skyrim's Riverwood, a quaint little town nestled in a narrow mountain pass along the White River in southern Skyrim. Mechanically, Riverwood functions as an extension of the tutorial, serving to introduce the player to how conversations and quests work, but its design is restrictive to the point that it undermines the player's freedom while still failing to adequately introduce the player to the world of Skyrim, and I'm going to explain how. But before we get right into it, I want to give a quick shout out to my members, currently on screen. They go above and beyond to support the channel, and I'm very grateful to them. Being a member is never required, but always appreciated. Thank you. As is tradition for any Elder Scrolls game, I gotta talk about the mod situation. They don't matter for this video, but I guess in case anyone is curious, they're on screen now, and they're linked in the description. Alright, moving on. After exiting the caves beneath Helgen, Riverwood is an obvious first stop for the player. It's the nearest settlement to where we're standing, the obvious path before us leads right to it, and Hadvar or Ralof will lead us along that path to Riverwood as well, should we choose to follow them. In fact, we'll still get a quest pointing us to Riverwood, even if we immediately start sprinting away from our companion. It's pretty obvious Bethesda wants the player to go to Riverwood, and they treat it like the early game location that it is, filling it with NPCs that mostly serve to flesh the world out and provide the player with some essential early game services. And I'm going to focus on those services first because I want to lead with the positives. Riverwood's centrally located blacksmith is an especially prominent feature of the small settlement and rightfully deserves its place. While the Riverwood trader, and we'll be going there in a bit, is absolutely of use to new characters, there's a lot to be said for Alvar's little smithy. First, Alvar is set to always carry full leveled sets of light and heavy armor, up to glass for light armor and ebony for heavy, though obviously not while the player is level 1. For new characters, he's more likely to have leather and iron. This gives new characters a prime opportunity to fill any lingering gear gaps that might still exist after the escape from Helgen. I find he pretty consistently has a couple steel pieces as well, allowing for potential upgrades. Alvar's merchant inventory also includes a full set of leveled weapons, except for a dagger, so if we didn't get the weapon that we wanted during the tutorial proper, this is our chance. And finally, like Adrian in Whiterun, Alvar offers the blacksmithing tutorial quest to the player. This is also supposed to be offered by Lod and Falkreath, but 2 or 3 re-releases and post-release patch cycles later, depending how you want to count them, this bug remains officially unpatched. Kind of a shame, since Falkreath is the most obvious other starter town that a new player is likely to reach. You know what, I'm going to talk about the moment we leave the caves beneath Helgen. Perhaps it's merely my little neurodivergent self not knowing how to assert my dominance in the social pecking order, but I've never seen a good role-playing option other than following the person that just saved our life and is actively talking to us. According to my comments, this is the unpopular option, and most of you are rude AF and just run off into the wilderness. I'm honestly really surprised by that, because I've found that humans are typically quite keen on following paths, but whatever. Alt-tabbers, I'm showing a map now, if you care to tab back in. No pressure though, just a heads up. Upon exiting Helgen, we're told that it's probably prudent for us to clear out of the area and avoid any Imperial soldiers. Therefore, from a role-playing perspective, turning around and heading back toward Helgen isn't really an option, which leaves us with the options of going straight ahead to Riverwood, to the left, or to the right. Turning to the left and bolting into the trees like a little weirdo will likely lead the player to Falkreath. After a few early dungeons in the area, the player will be looking for a place to offload their loot, and besides Riverwood, the closest option from anywhere in the hold is Falkreath. This is why I say it's the obvious other settlement for new characters. It's a good one, actually. I really enjoy the somber, rainy vibe. It's quiet and peaceful. Maybe I'll visit it in a video someday. But not today, not if I ever want to get this uploaded. Like and subscribe if you want to see future videos though. Turning to the right and heading into the trees will eventually lead us into the literal rock wall that is the throat of the world. Navigating around this mountain will lead us either to the south, to the ruins of Helgen, or to the north, to Riverwood. It's absolutely possible to go past Helgen and through the unnamed pass between the Jarl Mountains and the throat of the world. It just isn't a great direction to go unless we're trying to speedrun the Thieves Guild, which requires prior game knowledge to know it's there. If we choose to go this way, Iverstead is some ways off and not especially well appointed with services. Riften is a large city with plenty of services, but it's a pretty long ways off, and the Rift can offer a surprisingly stiff challenge to a level 1 character. In terms of practicality, Whiterun is closer to Iverstead anyway. If you have loot to sell, East just ain't it this early in the game. As for trying to get around the throat of the world to the north, I tried with this one, I really did. There is no avoiding Riverwood on the northern route around the throat of the world. Unless you walk through it without doing anything, but that's such a determined display of intentional avoidance that it kind of just proves my point. I'm not saying this is poor design, by the way. In an open world game like this, it's very smart to both have specifically early game content and funnel your players toward it. Honestly, this is pretty fantastic world design. This whole biome around Lake Ilinalta can be thought of as Beginner's Valley, and it's brilliantly constructed to box the player into a controlled tutorial area. The dungeons are all levels appropriate for the early game as well. I did say I was going to lead with the positives after all. But let's get back to Riverwood itself. Just behind Alvar's smithy, another prominent feature is Girder's Mill. It's possibly the most prominent feature, but talking about the blacksmith first was better for this video's flow. In any case, the mill itself isn't really anything too special as far as the player is concerned. We can buy sawn logs here if we own a hearthfire plot, but it's not the most convenient mill for any of those properties, and this doesn't matter to a new character anyway. No, for a new character, the Riverwood Mill represents a source of reliable and reasonably lucrative employment. An unowned woodcutter's axe is resting on a table by the mill, and Hod will buy firewood for the absurdly high price that firewood goes for in Skyrim, and nope, I am not elaborating on the economy of Skyrim right now. That could be an entire video on its own. Anyway, with that tangent avoided, this is one of the shorter runs from the chopping station to the NPC that will buy the wood. So, pretty good way for a new character to earn a few extra septims to round out their starter gear. And aside from Alvar, the other place to get that gear is the Riverwood Trader. I said we'd come back to it. As the proprietor of the local general store, Lucan Valerius stocks a wide range of practical goods. There's some armor, a few weapons, handful of potions, a couple enchanted things, lockpicks, crafting materials, bit of clutter. He even has a surprisingly robust selection of spell tomes compared to the majority of merchants in Skyrim. General goods traders will also buy a wide range of goods, so there's no better place for a fresh character in town to pawn off their wares for some establishing coinage. You know, like all that crap you looted from Helgen while it was burning to the ground, you monster. They weren't even dead yet, still writhing on the ground on fire while you looted them. I do it too, Rob, I'm blind. But the astute among you will have already noticed that this isn't the first time I've been in the Riverwood Trader on this character. Well done, good eyes, impeccable game knowledge, gold star. The first time we visit the Riverwood Trader, we're treated to a scripted sequence of Lucan and his sister having an argument over... Well, it's not really clear until you ask, but once we awkwardly make ourselves a part of this fight between siblings, we learn that the Riverwood Trader has suffered a break-in, and the thieves yoinked an ornamental golden claw. The argument we walked in on was about, Look, it's never explicitly said, but it's always seemed to me like Camilla was threatening to go get it back from the bandits up in Bleak Falls Barrow. This seems incredibly ill-advised for a level 4 pawnbroker with 75 health and restoration as her sole primary skill, at least as listed on the UESP. Anyway, yada yada, we go to the dungeon, we get a weird stone that we can't remove from our inventory because it's for the main quest, and then we turn the claw in for a leveled amount of gold, which, until level 10, that amount is worth the same as a few minutes of chopping logs. Nope, I said I wasn't going to get into Skyrim's wonky economy, that is for another time. But Bleak Falls Barrow serves an important role in the game. It's part of Skyrim's extended tutorialization. Riverwood is built the way it is to push the player along a predetermined path, and this is what us old Morrow boomers mean when we say that Skyrim railroads the player along the main quest. In addition to the pervasive sense of urgency, that is, both Skyrim and Morrowind are attempting to teach the player how to play the game, though they do so in very different ways. In my previous video on Morrowind's Satanin, I explained how Morrowind teaches the player the basics of how to interact with the game through the design of its starter town and the quests found within it. In Skyrim, Riverwood is very much trying to do the same thing, and Bleak Falls Barrow is the game's second tutorial dungeon. The first dungeon, the player's escape from Helgen, is an outlier among Skyrim dungeons. As a consequence of it being part of the heavily scripted introductory sequence, the gameplay loop that dominates the rest of the game is abridged, so Bleak Falls Barrow is the first time we get to experience the full loop. Like all main series Elder Scrolls and Bethesda-era Fallout games, and Starfield, Skyrim's macro gameplay loop consists of a few distinct steps. 1. The player receives a quest that sends them out of the settlement. 2. The player must travel to the quest objective, which is traditionally in a dungeon, though there's plenty of variety. While traveling, the player may be beset by brigands or wild beasts, or find a high-level enemy camp in the way, or just see a particularly juicy-looking thing to loot by the side of the road. This is adventure. 3. Upon reaching the place where the objective is, the player engages with the mechanics of the game and spends resources. This is often thought of in the sense of combat, but can also be hunting down NPCs in town and doing whatever quest step. 4. The player returns to civilization. Again, there is the opportunity for adventure along the way. Fast travel in the way that Skyrim does it obliviates this entirely unless done by deliberate choice. 5. The player does some shopping once in town, replenishing the supplies used and buying, or crafting, upgrades. Then we return to step 1, finding a new quest. Helgen jumps right to step 3, so the Golden Claw is Skyrim's opportunity to teach the player the rest of the loop, and it does a great job of it. Camilla will lead us a good bit of the way there, and this very intentional handing off of the player to the wilderness exists because it's entirely possible this is the player's first time going off on their own. Once released, the crafted scenario is only a short jaunt from town and features a sampling of mechanics from across the game. There's a mix of bandits and Draugr, letting the player get used to the differences between living and undead enemies, such as how Fury won't work on undead no matter how much I'd really like it if it did. Pedantic correction, it can work at level 90 illusion if you take the Master of the Mind perk, but if you already have that by the time you make it to Bleak Falls Barrow, this is no longer a relevant tutorial for you. The handcrafted content starts with 2 open world encounters before moving to tighter dungeon interiors, while still maintaining a good mix of different size spaces. We'll be fighting in hallways just as much as open arenas with multiple levels, testing our build, such as it is at this early stage, in a range of contexts. The dungeon also introduces the player to Skyrim's affinity for traps, obstacles, and what can generously be described as puzzles. It uses the game's 2 most common puzzles, symbol matching pillars and the claw doors. They're both the same puzzle, actually. They were very excited about the ability to inspect items in your inventory, alright? That was a new thing for the franchise. Speaking of the puzzles, the guy with the torch in this hallway, I recently discovered that if you wait for a few seconds, he'll try his hand at the puzzle and die to the trap. That's some fun scripting. Bleak Falls Barrow even has 2 bosses on offer, with very different movesets. They're nothing groundbreaking, but they're solid for Babby's first dungeon. Although you only need to fight the mid-boss to get the golden claw for Lucan, who stops partway through a dungeon. I guess leave a comment if you have, and please explain why. I'm genuinely curious what would possess someone of such a thing. Anyway, fighting our way through to the end will award us with a Word of Power, which is an incredibly weird reward to give the player at this point in the game, given we can't make use of it and have zero context for why this is a worthwhile reward. It helps, somewhat, that this dungeon has 2 boss chests with good loot, one right next to the boss and the other right outside the exit. Of more immediate interest for this video, the player will also receive the Dragonstone as a reward. Though it's true that picking up the Dragonstone doesn't force the player to immediately head to Farengar to turn it into him. I mean, there isn't even any indication that it's of any importance other than our inability to remove it from our inventory. This still kinda cheapens the dungeon a bit for me. The Dragonstone is a bauble of some minor importance to the main questline, the objective of a small quest we're sent on by Farengar once we arrive in Whiterun. Completing the dungeon at the behest of Lucan, or Camilla if you kill him, will effectively kill 2 birds with 1 stone, which has a side effect of also skipping a crucial bit of setup for the story of the main quest. I always found this an odd choice. Spoilers for the opening hour or so of a 13-year-old game that you've definitely played if you're in this particular corner of the internet, but if we complete this quest after being told to by Farengar, we are treated to the setup for the opening act's reveal that Delphine is doing secret things because she is a member of the defunct Blades. If we instead clear this dungeon for Lucan and pick up the Dragonstone at the end of it, as is very easy to do, we will not see this sequence, and Delphine's involvement a quest or 2 later will come even more out of nowhere. But we don't know all that just yet, so we make our way out the back door of the dungeon and we're several meters up a sheer cliff face. We can walk back to Riverwood, but the obvious signaling here is that fast traveling back to town is easier. Once there, we turn the quest in, buy any goodies we need for our next adventure, and I make a confession. I'm telling this story out of order. When recording, I did things in a different order than what I'm presenting right now, and those of you that are for some reason watching this on your main monitor will probably have already noticed. Forgive me. I also want to complain about the Dragonstone one last time now that we're in town, before we totally move on from it. We have this thing in our inventory, yet we can't ask anyone in town about it. Even Lucan and or Camilla. Can't ask him. They don't even have a voice line to nudge the player along, something like, "Oh, that's weird. I wonder if Farengar, the court wizard in Whiterun, would know anything about that." Morrowind would have let us ask people about it. Benefits of unvoiced dialogue right there. Regardless, the Golden Claw is not the only quest to be found in Riverwood. It is merely the most involved. Well, okay, there's actually only one other quest proper that starts in Riverwood, a lovely letter. A lovely letter is the tale of a love triangle. Sven, a Nord bard who sings tales of great warriors, and Feindal, a Bosmer laborer who yearns for the freedom of the forest hunt, are both vying for the affection of Camilla Valerius. Both men are interested in your assistance to deliver a forged letter that makes the other look like a huge piece of da tiao. Whichever man we speak to first will hand us their forged letter, and we have the option of then taking it to the other, who will swap the fake letters out. Neither one is the bigger man in this situation. When we take whichever letter we end up with to Camilla, we can either be a complicit party by handing her the letter with a lie, or we can rat out the one who wrote the letter we have. We cannot warn her that both men are slimy and gross. So it falls to the Dragonborn, though we probably don't know that yet, to be the arbiter of love and hand one of these gross guys the girl. First, I'd love to turn to Camilla if we could and see if she has opinion of them, but... So she'll mention that Sven has sent her poetry before, but doesn't seem aware that Feindal is even into her. I guess that's a vague point in Sven's favor, maybe? I guess we have to look at the two of them and see if we can conclusively determine who's the better option for Camilla. Sven is, as best as I can tell, kind of a total deadbeat, playing music at the local tavern for 16 hours a day. I assume he's getting paid by Delphine, but he might be living entirely off tips. Feindal, curiously, will mention that Sven ostensibly has a job at the mill, but he rarely, if ever, actually does that work. But there's another, significantly more cynical, criteria we can judge these two men on: their utility to us, the player. I actually didn't realize this for several years because it isn't really called out to the player at all, but Sven and Feindal can both become followers if we finish this quest in their favor, which is kind of weird, isn't it? Hey, I know I was just the wingman of the century and you got some moves you need to make, but how's about we go on an adventure for an indeterminate length of time? Well, it turns out Sven and Feindal are not completely interchangeable as followers. They are statistically different, and pretty significantly at that. Feindal is pretty solid. Like, he's not the best follower in the game by any stretch, but you could do significantly worse for an early game follower. Archery, light armor, sneak, one-handed, and speech. Only one skill that's useless for a follower, and he's even a trainer for archery, up to level 50. And if you know, you know. On the other hand, Sven, according to his in-game class, is a lumberjack. This gives him the primary skills of alchemy, enchanting, smithing, archery, one-handed, and two-handed. Not really a great mix, no armor for example, but that isn't really the problem with Sven. The issue with Sven is that his level scaling is terrible, and he has a personal level cap of only 20, which, unlike every other follower in the game as best I can tell, is not lockstep with the player's level, but is instead 75% of the player's level. Sven starts with 91 health, and this lasts until the player reaches level 10, at which point it will begin to increase. When Sven reaches level 20, at player level 27, Sven has 208 health. Oh, there's a chart on screen right now if you're an alt-tabber that cares about that kind of thing. As just a thing, I want to point out that the formula for Sven's health on the UESP does not match what I observed in-game in my own testing. The formula shown on the UESP actually makes Sven look pretty significantly worse than he really is. In any case, at the much lower player level of 20, Feindal will match Sven's maximum 208 health, and Feindal continues to scale until level 30, when he has 290 health. There's a valid argument to be made that by the time Sven's level cap comes into play, the player will have better options available anyway, and that's fair, but why is he still so much worse than Feindal even within that level range? Considering these are interchangeable characters within their quest, why are their stats not identical? Why is Feindal a trainer while Sven is not? Why is Sven the only follower in the game that doesn't have a morality value of 0 or 3? Why, actually, is Sven like this? As a point of reference, I also plotted out Janasa's health gain. She starts at 190 health until level 11, and then scales all the way up to 490 health at level 40. You don't know who Janasa is? She's a Dunmer Ranger for hire in the Drunken Huntsman. You know, that weird second weapon shop in Whiterun that I always forget is a weapon shop and assume it's a second pub instead, so I almost never go in it? Maybe that's just me. But if you don't know who Janasa is, here's the stats for Lydia as a truly common point of reference. Lydia actually starts with a bit less health than Janasa, but this only lasts until player level 9, so it's pretty inconsequential. However, she then blows past Janasa all the way to 673 health at player level 50, which is her cap. For the record, I'm only comparing health between these followers because it makes it very simple to see what's happening. Stamina is doing a similar thing, and Magicka is different, but none of these followers use spells anyway. I also find that health is the most important follower stat by a country mile because more health means more staying power, and I find followers have more value as tanks than as damage dealers. Maybe I should do a deep dive on the followers sometime. That would be something. So many spreadsheets. But end of the day, if you're wondering if the followers in Riverwood are worth it, yeah, they ain't. In any case, for this character, I grabbed Faendal and wrecked some scrubs in Bleak Falls Barrow because he tends to stick to his bow, and it was fun trying to pull aggro and maintain his line of fire. Once we return to Riverwood, there's really only one more place to visit: the Sleeping Giant Inn. The inn becomes a major location for the early stretch of the story, but none of that is obvious to us just yet. For now, the Sleeping Giant Inn functions as merely an inn. It is a place to buy food, relevant for their survival mode or just role-playing, rent a room for the night, or go looking for work. In some inns, we can also find blades for hire like Janasa, but not here. I'm here to talk about the final quest available in Riverwood, though that's being a little generous. It's a Radiant quest, and those of you familiar with Oblivion's marketing, or just the general discourse around Elder Scrolls games, will know what that means. For everyone else, a quick rundown. In Skyrim, some quest lines, such as the Companions, will have points where it makes narrative sense to have the player complete quests that are part of the faction's day-to-day operations. Rather than making bespoke, but ultimately generic-feeling content, Skyrim instead uses a system where these quests can be randomly generated, like a Mad Lib where it picks a vague premise, a dungeon, an enemy type, etc., and slaps them together. The benefit is that these quests are inherently unique for each player and each playthrough. The downside is that they're not very unique. Even so, I still find myself picking these up and doing them periodically, because it's neat from a role-playing perspective to pick up bounties from the taverns as a freelance mercenary or adventurer. And now it's time for one of my patented tangents. The Radiant quest system in Skyrim is pretty weird, especially with these bounty quests from barkeepers. The UASP describes a system wherein there are 4 quest types that can be generated: Bandit, Dragon, Forsworn, and Giant. We may only have one of each type at any given time, and may only have one at a time from within a single hold. These facts checked out for me. The UASP also states that we cannot receive the same quest twice in a row from the same hold. In my testing, I got 4 Bandit Leader Radiant quests in a row, so not sure what was going on there. My best guess is that I was too low level for the Giant quest, though I don't know for a fact that it's level gated. There are no Forsworn targets in Whiterun, and I hadn't yet triggered Dragons, so Bandit Leader is the only option available. However, in the notes on the UESP page, it specifically describes a case where the hold will not generate a new bounty quest if we just completed the same type within a hold, and that type is the only eligible one. So back to not really knowing, I guess. In any case, the thing I want to point out here is that this Radiant quest, wherever it happens to point to, is destined to eventually point us to Jarl Balgruf in Whiterun City to collect our reward. The same Whiterun where we must interact with another main quest step to enter the city in the first place, and where we are intercepted with an entire dialogue sequence on our way to get our piddling little reward. So the quests of Riverwood are a love triangle that sends us nowhere new, a nearby out and back dungeon quest that's also main questline busywork, and a radiant quest that sends us toward the main quest. There is nothing in Riverwood to prompt the player into exploring the world and getting lost in it. But perhaps I'm looking at this all wrong. Riverwood's value as an extended tutorial is obvious, but perhaps it was never intended to be a launching off point for the player's great adventures. Perhaps Riverwood's value is in being the player's introduction to the world of Skyrim. So, from that angle, what does Riverwood tell us about the world of Skyrim? The character of a place is found in its people. So, let's take a look at the people of Riverwood. I've already spoken at length about Sven and Feindal, but there is one other character that exists in their orbit. Kinda. This is I think it's pronounced Hilda, but I'm not anything resembling Nord enough to know that for sure. In any case, you probably know her as the old woman that yells about,
"Dragon! I saw a dragon!"
What? What is it now, Mother?
It was as big as the mountain and black as night. It flew right over the barrow.
Hilda is Sven's mother, and we cannot speak with her. Other than her lines about dragons, she'll also make some xenophobic comments regarding elves and talk up her son's dating credentials in that way that old people do. But since we can't get anything more interesting than that out of her, we're moving on. Back to the Sleeping Giant Inn. I've already briefly touched on Delphine, and she continues to hide her secrets from our early game character. For now, she's a pretty normal, if somewhat ornery and slightly suspicious innkeeper, and doesn't do much to impact the player's impression of the world of Skyrim. Similarly, Orgnar isn't exactly forthcoming with fresh information, though curiously he will provide us with the alchemy tutorial if we ask about using the alchemy station. Again, Riverwood is surprisingly well equipped for being such a small rural settlement. Other than that curiosity, he'll tell us about the usual current events. Dragons, the war, the break-in at the Riverwood Trader, the local love triangle, and...
There have been whispers. A boy up in Windhelm, name of Aventus Aretino, been trying to contact the Dark Brotherhood.
Finally, we have Embry, Riverwood's very own resident drunk. He doesn't contribute much on his own, but helps paint the picture of the Sleeping Giant Inn as being the tavern of a quiet, sleepy settlement where everyone knows each other and kinda lets everyone get away with a lot. On the opposite end of the spectrum, illustrating the hope and economic prosperity of the settlement, we have the inhabitants of the Riverwood Trader, Lucan and Camilla Valerius. Outside of Camilla's involvement in the local love triangle or either of their involvement in the Golden Claw quest, there is precious little we can glean from them. However, after finishing the Golden Claw quest, the siblings will gain some fresh dialogue between them. There's nothing too interesting to be found in these little exchanges, but Camilla is presented as an entrepreneur looking to grow the business with creative marketing campaigns or fresh new inventory. Lucan is a business owner who has found a niche and is more conservative about the prospect of trying to grow the business. After all,
Camilla, everyone in Riverwood already shops here. There are no more customers.
There's also two kids running around. What, were you expecting me to analyze them? They're Skyrim kids. They exist to be ambient background, making the world seem alive. There's nothing interesting about them.
Why children take so long to grow? They eat and drink like pig and give nothing back. Must find way to accelerate process.
Well, alright, fine. There are two kids. Frodnar is the local prankster, and the end. As best as I can tell, and maybe I got hit with the NPCs no longer converse with each other on this save file bug for the third time while making this video, but as best as I can tell, there is nothing else going on with this boy. He exists primarily to be the child of the Stormcloak supporting family who is friends with the child of the Empire supporting family, begging us to ask the question, why can't everyone just be friends? Because plot is driven by conflict and you live in a piece of media, Jimmy. Sorry, Frodnar, whatever. Frodnar's friend, Dorothy, is much more interesting. She's the blacksmith's daughter and is grade A tomboy material, much to her mother's chagrin and her father's delight. I do find this interesting in that it characterizes Sigrid, Dorothy's mother and Alvar's wife, as being pretty conservative in regards to gender roles. Typically, I would say that the Stormcloaks are the faction that represents traditional Nordic values, which are pretty wrapped up in their veneration of masculine strength, while the Empire is more... well, it kind of just doesn't care. Bethesda's handling of sex and gender in their games is a topic for another video, perhaps. But this brings us to Alvor and Gerdur. Yeah, I'm skipping their spouses. Like their kids, Sigrid and Hod exist to populate the worlds, but they don't add much beyond their presence. What I mean is that they don't comment on the world or current events or express some philosophy in a way that is meaningfully impactful or adds value or enrichment to our impression of Skyrim. Which, I mean, that's fine. Not everyone cares about the political goings-on around them. Having characters that are head down into their own business is totally realistic. In any case, Alvar, that's a blacksmith if you've forgotten, and Gerdur, who runs Riverwood's lumber mill, are the last two characters I'm going to talk about, because they're easily the most interesting from the player's perspective. Both Alvar and Gerdur are the Riverwood contacts we are instructed to meet up with by Hadvar and Ralof, respectively. They are thus the first non-combatant supporters of the Empire and the Stormcloaks, again respectively, that we're able to speak to, and they're both able to defend their position on the Civil War. Kind of. I'll explain that in a moment, but first, let's see what they have to say. We'll start with Alvar. What do you think about the war?
People are rightly stirred up about the damn Thalmor being allowed to roam around arresting people, just for worshipping Talos. But was it worth tearing Skyrim apart and maybe destroying the Empire? No. Ulfric will have a lot to answer for in the end. Nords have always supported the Empire, and the Empire has always been good for Skyrim.
Why are the Thalmor allowed to arrest people for worshipping Talos?
It's from that treaty that ended the Great War, remember? When the Emperor was forced by the Thalmor to outlaw Talos worship. We didn't pay much attention to it when I was a boy. Everyone still had their little shrine to Talos. But then, Ulfric and his Sons of Skyrim started agitating about it. Sure enough, the Emperor had to crack down, dragging people off in the middle of the night. One of the main causes of this war, if you ask me.
I like the nuance in Alvar's take here. He lays blame on multiple parties. The Empire bent over and signed the treaty, the Thalmor are the Thalmor, but he still blames Ulfric and the Stormcloaks more broadly for truly inciting the war. The reason I like this nuance is that it reflects the inherent messiness of the conflict. Yes, it's a civil war occurring within Skyrim, but it's merely one part of a much larger conflict that's been raging across Tamriel for some time now. The geopolitical state of the world is not good in 4th Era 201. Despite my appreciation for the nuance found in this argument, I don't think Alvar is really considering the potential impact of a loyal or independent Skyrim in the face of Thalmor aggressors, who, by all accounts, seem to be openly preparing for the next phase of the Great War. Let's see if Gerdur has anything to add. Do you support the Stormcloaks?
Of course. Ulfric's cause is just. It's time for Skyrim to rid itself of the Empire. The Empire may have been good for Skyrim once upon a time, but those days are long past. Banning the worship of Talos was the last straw. Thalmor everywhere, dragging people off for honoring our own gods. I'm glad Ralof is helping drive them out of here. If I was a bit younger, I might have joined the fight myself.
I so wish this was better. This is purely emotional reasoning. Perhaps, at one point, there were rational arguments that underpinned these emotions for Gerdur, but they are not presented to us in her words. But then again, Skyrim seems to routinely forget that its most interesting story is about the nuanced geopolitics of a complicated civil war and not Bad dragon go rawr! I just want to point out that Girder will also tell us...
The thought of my wood being used for weapons makes me sick. I might have joined the fight myself.
Realistically, this shouldn't matter very much, but there's one little wrinkle that I haven't mentioned yet. You can only ask Alvar or Girder for their opinion on the Civil War if you sided with their respective faction representative during the Helgen escape sequence. If you side with Ralof, you cannot ask Alvar his stance. If you side with Hadvar, you can't ask Girder for her opinion. The options literally aren't there. These are the first two characters you're able to ask about the details of the Civil War, yet you can only ask one and are never exposed to the opposite viewpoint. This strikes me as especially unusual because the decision the player makes during the Helgen escape is non-binding. We haven't chosen a side in the war yet, and even once we do, it's still possible to switch sides a couple quests in. Bring yourself back to the time you first played Skyrim, before the internet had broken every minute aspect of the game down into 50 bajillion video essays narrated by some weirdo on the internet, like yours truly. These two NPCs exist to introduce us to the world and its core conflict, and they are, by design, probably the first characters any new player has the opportunity to ask about the state of the world, and one of them is always disabled based on a prior decision that otherwise has basically no permanent consequences. It's a strange decision. But I've become distracted. Riverwood is a linear experience. There's a good selection of early game services, a handful of NPCs to speak to, and a couple very short quests. You are not meant to linger in Riverwood. You are meant to sell your loot, buy a weapon or something, and move on to Whiterun for the next heavily scripted sequence. It isn't entirely without other suggestions, at least. Hadvar or Ralof will suggest you join their side of the Civil War. The rumor from Orgnar points you to Windhelm and the Dark Brotherhood questline, and asking anyone you can about where to get spells will have them direct you to the College of Winterhold, you damn weirdo. Or, as I'm sure I'll hear in probably about half of the comments on this video, you can ignore all of this careful design and just run off into the trees and murder hobo your way across the nation without ever picking up a quest. You do you. After all, that's really the beauty of Skyrim, isn't it? And if you made it this far, thanks for sticking around while I rambled about some quiet rural village in a 13-year-old game. I really do appreciate it. You know how YouTube works, so give this a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe if you really liked it, and feel free to drop a comment down below, whatever your opinion may be. I welcome any and all thoughts and feedback. I even welcome the relative flood of comments telling me that they've never done the main quest and how dare I insinuate otherwise. Seriously, I counted and 30% of the comments on my Stealth Archer video are people loudly proclaiming they've never touched a bow in their lives. I just thought that was funny and wanted to share. But at the end of the day, thank you very much for stopping by and lending me your ear, and, as always, have a great one.